Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Get in Tune. Let me just adjust my camera. I'm looking a little crooked today. So I'm Michael Gracia. You guys know who I am. I'm going to have a great show tonight because, by the way, I was just chatting with the guests backstage and having such a good time chatting with them. It's going to be a really great show. Before we do that, though, a couple of things. One, don't forget, right there, at the Wiz Comic. Today is Wiz Wednesday. New strip is up. If you've been following the strip for the last, I don't know, since end of January, it's basically been a D&D adventure, and it's kind of getting close to the end, I would say. So make sure you're following at the Wiz Comic every Wednesday by 9 a.m. Eastern on Facebook and Instagram. Also, I have to give a shout out and a happy birthday to one of my favorite cartoon characters, Marvin the Martian. It is on this day, 75 years ago in 1948, that Haredevil Hair was Marvin Martian's first appearance. So after the show, maybe hop on YouTube, Max, wherever, throw in a DVD and give a little Marvin Martian some love tonight. All right, so with that, let's bring on our guest. He is a writer. He is actually in these two Zorro books, which I got to illustrated. So I didn't do his stories, but we both are in the same Zorro books. We both have a love of Zorro. We love both Venture Press books. He has a bunch of other things that he's written and has done in life, and we're going to learn a lot about him tonight. Let's bring on Teel James Glenn. Hello.
Hello. Center myself a little more. Hi there.
Hi, thank you for coming on tonight.
Oh, very much my pleasure. No one visits me in the cave since I put up the plague sign outside. It's sad.
Yeah.
No.
We got already one comment saying, looking forward to this chat. So Carol, I don't know how to say your last name, Guyzander, maybe? Thank you for tuning in tonight. Yes. Now, I don't know if you remember this. I didn't tell you backstage, but we met once before. We met at a Pulp Con that Bold Venture Press put on in New Jersey. I think it was 2 years ago.
It would have been 2 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't go to the last one. And I actually, do I have it here? I bought your book, one of your books from you.
Oh my God, you're still talking to me?
And I'm trying to find it. I thought I had it behind me. But it was the Chronicles of Skull Mask.
Skull Mask, yes.
Yeah, and I've only read the first 2 chapters since I got it. I'm way behind on my books. I'm one of those people, I buy a bunch of books, and
Hey,
it's like,
look,
I'll get to it.
You can always call me up if you have problems with the big words. I will help you.
Yeah, thank you. No, but it's what I've read so far, and I'm actually rereading because I read the first 2 chapters when I got it. And then I put it on, and I realized I never finished. And then when I asked you, I'm like, I should read your book again. And then I'm like, oh, wait.
My to-be-read pile is not only large, but the sad part is at this point, so much of it are people I know that the guilt of not reading them is trebled.
Yeah.
Including Wayne Carey. So it's, yeah. There's only so many hours in a day.
No, I know. And I spend most of mine, drawing when I'm not working at my day job.
Most of mine are writing. So, I have to choose that. Do I create it or do I absorb it?
Yeah.
And back and forth.
Yeah. I will say I am trying to read more. I'm trying to make an effort to read more for a few reasons. One, I need to shut down my brain from drawing constantly, rest my arm. But also, I'm trying to write my first prose book. I've never written a prose before.
Excellent.
And I want to absorb other writers. I'll be honest. I showed 2 of my friends who are great writers. I've written 11 pages, and I said I've always felt I was an immature writer because I had reading issues growing up. So I don't feel I write as well. I can write scripts. I can write comics. But prose was always my issue.
Yeah.
And they both gave me such positive feedback. Because I said, be honest. If you don't think I could do it, tell me. I don't want to waste my time.
If you're a storyteller, it doesn't matter the medium. And you can learn the mechanics of any given medium
Yeah.
You can't learn to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
That has to come innately.
I
And if
agree
you're
with
doing it in comics, it means you already are doing the poetry of prose,
you.
because comics have to be the fewest words and the most images.
Yeah.
So it's not that hard to transition once you get over the fear of like choosing the wrong word, because you can rewrite. Rewriting is the best part of it often.
Yeah.
You know.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But like I said, they gave me such positive feedback, and I'll tell you, one told me, he goes, "This is the perfect start to a first draft." He goes, "Obviously, you have some spelling errors and some grammatical
Well,
stuff. Everybody has that."
Yeah.
And he said, "You know what? You need to work on your sentence structure just a little bit, and you get that from reading more to absorb writers." So,
the other thing I always tell people: read your work aloud, even if you only read it aloud to yourself, because clumsy sentences don't want to come out of your mouth. And if it reads clumsy, it will visually clumsy. People are hearing it in their head. And if it's a clumsy sentence, their mind will go, wait a minute, he's talking about again? Was it the guy with the red hat or the guy with the blue hat? Yes. So, I always consider myself a Shawnee, which is an Irish storyteller. They were the bards who couldn't sing. And because I can't, you don't want to hear it. And because I want all my stories to feel like I'm sitting on a bar stool next to you, telling you the story.
Yeah.
And I want that kind of engagement with everything I write. Because if I don't have that, I don't feel, we're competing against so much media now. It has to connect emotionally to the individual, But I'm a comic book guy. I started in comics. I actually studied under Dick Giordano at Parsons. I did some backgrounds for him. I was terrible. I drew a couple of issues of Action Master comics back in the day for an independent company. And I was a book illustrator. I was trained at Parsons. So that was the first career I didn't make $1 million at. I've moved on to not make $1 million at several other careers, including stunt work. So,
I'm gonna talk to you about comics in a little bit. Also, because a mutual friend of ours, when I posted this on my Facebook page that you're going to be on tonight, said you were one of the first people to publish him, and that's Tom Siaka.
Oh, that monster, that beast, that creature from beneath the Bronx. Yeah, him and George Perez.
Yep.
And actually, I photographed George's first wedding when he was a bronze, black-haired Puerto Rican god as a young man, before he went streamlined himself.
Yeah.
And I've known Tom pretty much since the beginning of time. I still remember he when he was in his college, he was on the newspaper, and he was called to go interview Diana Rigg when she was doing Alabard and Heloise on Broadway, and he invited me along. So I got to actually speak to Diana Rigg.
That's cool.
It's amazing I could form words, So we have a lot of history.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's a good
some
guy.
of it myth.
Now there is one question but before I get to it, Wayne's actually asking the question. Usually I start the show and we already went in. We're like almost 10 minutes in. I didn't even ask the first question. Is for those who don't know who you are, can you give us a little background on who Teel is and kind of like how you got started in the industry?
Okay, my name is Teel James Glenn. I'm from Brooklyn. I was a very sickly kid, so it was Saturday matinee serials, Commando Cody, Lone Ranger, and Zorro that were my buddies growing up. And by the time I got to high school, I was already drawing in grammar school. By the time I got to high school, I knew I wanted to be a comic book artist and tell stories, but I also wanted to make films. And then I saw Chapter 2 of the Adventures of Captain Marvel serial at a Phil Seuling convention. And I saw the stunt work in that, and it was the first time I saw them, aside from Reeves' Superman, where they did it straight. They didn't make fun of it. I hated making fun of the heroes. And so I'm like, I want to do that. And so I taught myself how to do stunts. I read everything I could on it. I used to watch movies frame by frame on a little moviola to see how the stuntmen's bodies fell. So I couldn't run track, but I could jump off a roof. You don't need a lot of air to jump.
Yeah.
And eventually I went to art school thinking I'd be able to support my film career with my art career. And I didn't say I was bright. And but the last week in school, I met a guy who was auditioning people for a movie, and I auditioned for it, and he needed someone to storyboard it. And I went, I can do that. I can storyboard fights. I knew how they were done. I've been doing them in my own Super 8 movies. I did a Rocket Man and a Captain Marvel movie, imitating Don Bluth. And so eventually I got the lead in the movie. It was never finished, but the members of the crew kept handing me off, and I did like 6 or 7 films right after that, and kind of never looked back. I worked as an illustrator for a while for like the Helen Keller Foundation and If magazine and a bunch of others, but I was making money. I got work on soap operas. Nothing I did for years. My mother acknowledged that I was doing anything until she saw me on a soap opera. Then it was suddenly real. But I was bar patrons for a while, and then eventually Jimmy Bohr on Guiding Light saw me in an airplane pilot's uniform and said, oh, he's a tall Irish-looking guy. And he put me in a police uniform, and I worked as a cop on Guiding Light for like 8 years.
Wow. Anytime
there was a police station, I was walking through it. I'd have extra or under 5 or sometimes day player, so I had a major character. Whereas all the other soaps, I worked stunts. I menaced Susan Lucci. I doubled Ace-on One Life to Live, falling downstairs and getting set on fire. By now, I was taking stage combat classes. And I studied under Patty Crane, who was Errol Flynn's last stunt double in Against All Flags, Casanova, and Casanova, and the last unfinished one, William Tell. So, I mean, I kind of never looked back. I did films for years. Eventually I did 60 Renaissance festivals as a jouster and eventually as a storyteller. I do all the voices and stuff like that when I'm, playing characters. It's sort of all integrated. When I was a stunt coordinator, I could come in and give them a drawing of exactly what the stunt would look like. I could place the cameras. I could tell them the best angles to get the most out, because there was a lot of low budget stuff. I'm in a lot of stuff that shows up on USA Cable and Cinemax. I think the movie that probably showed the most was Lord of the G-Strings. I'm in that like 15 times as different characters. I'm in Troma's War 20 times as different characters. I was Vega in Street Fighter the later years, web series. And I was Toxic Avengers stunt double, and whenever the Noxious Avenger was on one side, I was the other one. Whenever you saw the back, doing the fights. So, but yeah, I did that for 40 years. Meanwhile, early on, I realized I can fall down forever, but eventually I won't be able to get up. So I better have a backup, and it's not going to be carpentry, because I couldn't cut mats in college. I almost chopped my fingers off. I started only drawing in pre-mat made sizes for everything. So I started writing. My first things were scripts. I converted them into novels, and I've got like 30 out now and another 10 that are in the hopper with different publishers. And I've written for Weird Tales, Cirsova, Mystery Weekly, Black Cat Weekly, a bunch of other magazines, Sherlock Holmes Mystery. That's become my default now that I'm retired. I taught stage combat for like 30 years as well. Wow. But I'm now retired. COVID kind of put the kibosh on it all. At that point, it was kind of not worth going back after the 2 years of isolation. But I got a lot written in those 2 years, because when you can't leave the room, and it's not big enough for me to run around it. So I just sat at my desk and slapped the keys until something came out like a monkey.
That's great. And you've written quite a few things for Bold Venture.
Yes, I discovered Bold Venture, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe 3 years ago, something like that. I had been buying their books, but I didn't quite. Somehow it didn't, because I'm a pulp nut. I've been a pulp fan forever. It didn't connect that. Oh, they take stuff, and then I sent stuff into Pulp Adventures, and then they took my Maxi Moxie series, which is husband and wife detectives set in the 1930s, sort of Nick and Nora Charles meets the X-Files.
Okay.
And the one that I'm excited about right now is in production is the Pulp Guy book of Pulp Heroes.
Wow.
And it's a reference book with 40 of the major pulp characters, their whole history from comic book, radio incarnations, television and film incarnations, with each one of them. And there's Doc Savage and the Shadow, and then all of their imitators, and then Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and all of their imitators. But things like Bran McMorrin and some of the others that were minor characters, and of course Conan, and things like while the Phantom was never a pulp character, Flash Gordon was a pulp character for 2 issues.
Yeah.
So I only dealt with characters that actually had a pulp.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of characters that people think of from that time. Like there was never a Green Hornet pulp, even though we think of him as a pulp character.
Yeah.
But there was a Lone Ranger pulp for a couple of issues. So that's the one I'm excited about. It's going to have, I think, hopefully it will be the reference book that every pulp nut will need to get their hands on, because Bold Venture does the most beautiful production. Rich Harvey, who's their art department guy, everything he does is gorgeous. The covers, the interiors, the layout, as well as they happen to be really nice people, which certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I found another pulp that you and I are both in with them, and the pulp. I illustrated Don Everett Smith's American Crusader story in this.
Oh, cool! All right, I remember that. And my friend Frank Schillender wrote the Phantom House story.
Okay.
Awesome. Him and I we're I've only met him once in person, but we're Facebook. Throws things back and forth. He's also got a martial arts background as well. So, we have a lot. We find it's funny. This is the town square of the modern world, I think, of Facebook. Even though people say it's outdated and it's a terrible thing, I've met a lot of great people through it, and I've gotten a lot of jobs through it. And I think it's kind of a cool window it's like anything else if you use it right.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I use it for niceness.
I used to use it when I first started with it, and I'm going back to 2007, 2008, whenever I first started with it. I got work, like freelance work off of it for a few years, and then that stopped. But I like that I get to, meet fans, meet, my friend, like you said, meet new people. I still use it basically on a daily basis. A lot of times it's just go on, post, and get off. But,
I write on a laptop, so my desktop, I pretty much keep open. And it's usually open on Facebook, unless I'm watching like something on Tubi or YouTube. In which case it's right in front of me and I can write, look up, and go back to my writing. I'm one of those people. I grew up in Brooklyn where you never had quiet. So I can write in the middle of a thunderstorm or a bison stampede. It doesn't distract me. And I actually, if it's too quiet, I think the Apaches are after me. So I like a little noise.
It's funny because I'm kind of the opposite. I mean, I don't mind. I have no issue with the noise per se, but there are times I just want absolute silence because I need it to get my mind, you know.
I know people
Oh,
who only can work with music, and they do a soundtrack for the book they're writing, and they write to the music. Yeah, that's just it. It literally is a horse race. Everybody. That's why even as when I was a teacher, nobody learns the same way.
yeah.
Everyone has a unique way of absorbing information or processing it. So, like anybody say, if anyone says there are hard and fast rules to writing, it's A, trying to sell you something, and B, completely confused because there isn't. I've heard there's some famous writer who said there are 3 rules to writing, but nobody can remember what they are. You know?
Yeah.
So, it's just tell the story as you feel it.
Let's get to that question. I don't want to keep them waiting too long because now that we've
Really?
come into writing, Brenda here says, "I loved Murder Most Fair. What other mysteries have you written?"
Well, Murder Most Fair it's out of print now, and Bold Venture has it, so hopefully it will come into print again soon. Although I have some copies in the box. It's a murder mystery set as a fight choreographer is putting on a Renaissance fair. It was the first one that was written behind the scenes of a Ren fair, and since then many people have written it. It's actually based on my friend's murder. I found his body, and it was my way to process it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the book, we solved the murder. In real life, it never happened. But it's Murder Most Fair is pure that. And then there's the Maxi Moxie mysteries. Great. I can't remember. I'm trying to my own books now. Faywell, My Lovely. Good God. Call Back for a Corpse. And I forget what the third one is. It'll come back to me. But anyway, they're like I said, they're Nick and Nora Charles meets the X-Files. And there's a whole bunch of short stories with them as well, which will eventually come out from Bold Venture. And some of the Skullmaster stories are mysteries. There's almost always an element of mystery in what I write. And some of I write a sword and sorcery series for Altiva, and some of them are mysteries because it seems a natural thing that at the beginning of any story, the characters don't know what's coming. So, but I do have a book coming out in September from Crossroads Press called Not Born of Woman. And it's the first of a Paradise Investigations series. It's 1939 New York, and the Frankenstein monster is now a PI. And he's taking people's cases so he can learn how to be human. Because the best way is to find people who have problems and help them solve them. And he goes up against the Nazi Bund. That's the Nazi Bund calling.
I just turned my alarm.
That'll be out at the end of September. And I'm very proud of that. I think it's the best. And it's a solid, you can figure it out mystery. But I've written Sherlock Holmes stories and Gideon Sin series from Pro Se Press that are straight up mysteries. So yeah, I mean, I like to go from one genre to another. Literally, each story I go to another genre because it keeps me fresh, and I kind of cycle through, mystery, horror, adventure, sword and sorcery, back to mystery, and then I have a bunch of occult mysteries with my Dr. Argent characters, Semper Occultus, and Semper. Good Lord, Semper Occultus and Semper Britannia, and Britannia Occultus, and they are. If Merlin was Sherlock Holmes, it's the 1890s in England, and Dr. Argent is assigned as the minister without portfolio who deals with occult affairs. So he solves murder mysteries that might turn out to be a werewolf or might turn out to be a regular criminal. But they call him in when it's too weird for that Holmes guy. And Inspector Lestrade wanders through some of the stories as well. It's set in you never meet him, but it's set in that same universe.
Wow. Now let me ask you this, because like your Frankenstein monster story sounds fantastic. The one you just mentioned about in the Sherlock Holmes universe. I mean, obviously you grew up loving the pulps, you're influenced by the pulps, but where are you pulling these ideas from? Like, I never would have thought to make the Frankenstein monster a PI. Like,
Well, I honestly, it was a case of I've always considered him to be the victim,
mhm,
and he's the ultimate outsider. And so, if I want to put a spotlight on some aspect of society, let me backtrack. There's a whole thing about stay in your lane these days. And if you only write exactly who you are and what you do, I could only write about a Scots Irishman from Brooklyn, and I would be prohibited from writing anything else. And that's not the nature of being a writer. The nature of a writer is to go where you can't go physically and mentally and emotionally, but to do it with respect.
Yeah.
So in my case, I said, well, I want to comment on the rise of Nazism in America. It's right after the big Bund rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939. 20,000 Nazis paraded around Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I want to highlight that. But who do I pick to be my point of view character? And I went, let me pick somebody who's literally outside of it all. And his client is actually a hunchback Romany woman who comes to him to help recover a stolen article. And my grandmother was a hunchback. So even as a kid, watching all the old Universal Frankenstein movies, I never viewed the hunchback as deformed or twisted or evil. He was just a guy who was either good or bad. And so as he calls himself Adam Paradise because his favorite book is Paradise Lost. And Adam Paradise allows me to literally comment on every single segment of society and society in general. I call it Fists and Philosophy because he's beating up Nazis and quoting Proust and Thomas Aquinas. And it's the nature of what it is to be human, what it is to be a moral human, but what it is literally to be human. Is it your consciousness? Is it your connection to others? So, and I tell it first person. It's like Raymond Chandler and Mary Shelley had a baby. It's first person. You're there, and I've written a lot of stuff in that period. So there's a lot of research involved. I have a series called Dr. Shadows, which are also I'm very obviously very inspired by Doc Savage, but also very different. And they're all set in that same kind of large multiverse. And as I said, he's the ultimate outsider, and it allows me to make comment without hopefully drawing too much of my own background into it. Because he's the guy who, to him, everybody is the same because he's not part of any group. And because of that, Jews, Nazis, Romani, blacks, they're all just people. And that's how he sees them. Plus, he's 7'2", covered with scars, and everybody looks at him terrified.
Yeah.
So, he's had to work to be able to interact with people. He's not quite Karloff, that makeup, but he can be a scary guy. He wears gloves because his two hands don't match. And people notice the different textures and colors of the hands if he doesn't. So he wears gloves all the time. Little details like that make it hopefully come alive.
Yeah, I like that. Sounds like a great book. And when did you say it comes out again?
It comes out the end of September, the beginning of October. I don't have a firm date yet. It's coming out from Crossroad Press. So it should be in the bookstores. It's Paradise Investigations, Not Born of Woman. Because after all, he who was not born of woman, him have I to fear or none. and he is not born of woman.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's great. I think that sounds like a really fun book. So you're gonna have to let me know when that comes out. I'll let the
I
audience
will. I
know.
will.
That's great. Um, let's make sure because I have a feeling you and I could talk about a lot of stuff, have a good time, and
Yeah.
go off on a lot of tangents. Let's make sure we talk about some Zorro stuff, because I'll pull the books up again here. So the first one we worked on was Zorro's Exploits. And
Yep.
the new one that just recently came out is Zorro's Swordplay and Romance. Now, I haven't had a chance to illustrate your work yet. One day I hope to. Um, but I think I had some really great stories in here. Can you tell us about your um, your interest in Zorro and how you got to write with Bold Venture Press? And tell us about the story, and then tell us about the stories in these books.
Okay. Well, I grew up in the era of Ivanhoe and Lancelot and Buccaneers and Disney Zorro and Robin Hood. Those are the half-hour shows that were on, and were going into reruns as I was born in '55, and I used to have, give my age away, blue bonnet margarine cups, which were these blue plastic-ish metal things that your margarine came in. But if you put a hole in the middle and stuck them on a dowling, you had a Zorro sword, real cheap. So I used to Zorro sword fight in the lot across the street from my house. I wanted to be him in the worst way. And that really never left. Eventually, when I was actually writing my second book, and it had a sword fight at the end between a character and a yakuza. So a friend of mine said, "Hey, I hear this guy is teaching. He used to teach sword in California." And I studied with Faulkner, which was the guy who did a lot of the old Zorro movies. Cavins did the TV series, but Faulkner did the movies. She said, and one of his students is teaching here. Do you want to go take the class with me? And I went, yes. And the day that I held a sword in my hand, it was like there was a light and a heavenly choir. I knew that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. At that point, I was in terrible physical shape. And I've now returned to that full. But I trained to be able to sword fight. That was my goal. And eventually, I took classes from him and then from many other people, including Patty Crean. I went to the National Workshop, and I did 60 Renaissance festivals. I've choreographed almost all of the Shackespeare canon as a fight choreographer. I've appeared as Macbeth, and usually I'm a goon on stage because of my size. I'm 6'6", and I actually worked with. At one point, there was going to be a stage production of Zorro in the city, and I got to be one of the Alcalde's guards sword fighting in that. It was a backers audition, and I was a member of a group called Fights Are Us, and the guy who was the head of that was the stunt coordinator and fight choreographer for most of the New York soaps. So I ended up doing all of the New York soap operas through him.
Okay.
And then that got me into low budget film work, and then I started teaching sword, and I kind of never looked back. I mean, my apartment is books, comics, swords. That's sort of all I own. I could probably arm Guatemala if it wanted to go to war pre-firearms. Like the guy said, baseball been very, very good to me. Sword play's been very, very good to me. I've been very blessed to meet a lot of really good people and to work with a lot of really good people over the course of time. But one of the things that when you're a writer, you bring everything to the page. When I write sword and sorcery, I know what it's like to be on a sweating animal that's charging. I've jousted. I know what it's like, how heavy the sword is after 2 minutes of fighting. I know, what it's like to not have the vision you need in a helmet. And so all of that goes into the story to make it more real. And I can see the geography of the fights in my head because that's what I did for so long. So it all connects. And then Bold Venture, like I said, I'd been buying their stuff. But then when I realized, they have a magazine. And I sent them some stories, and they took the stories. And then when they were doing, they did a collection at one point. And I remember ballsy, I wrote Audrey Parente, who's the editor-in-chief. I wrote Audrey and said, hey, if you ever do a Zorro book with new stories, I'd really like to be in it. And like a year or two later, she wrote back, are you still interested? I'm like, hell yeah. So the first book, the first story, Zorro and the Red Devil, I think I wrote it in like 3 days over a Christmas holiday because it was just like, boom. It was an episode of the Guy Williams Zorro as far as I was concerned. I was writing that, and it reads like that. Although I reread all of the stories before I wrote it because I didn't want it to just be the Guy Williams Zorro. I wanted it to be Johnston McCulley's Zorro.
Yeah. And
there's a few subtleties in the Johnston McCulley's that the TV series fudged or never got around to. So I wrote that, and they were happy with it. I mean, bucket list item. It's awesome. And then a couple of years later, they said, we're doing another one called Swordplay and Romance. Are you in? I went, yeah. And so I wrote The Rose of Madrid. I wanted to do something different that they didn't do on the TV series and that Macaulay only hinted at. So I did a story about, because in the original book, people forget, in the original book, he knows the political situation is going to get bad in California. So he goes to Spain to train to come back as Zorro. And they allude to it in the first Tyrone Power movie. He talks about a serial killer in Madrid called the Fox. That gave him the idea to use the name, But in the book, it mentions that he heard of this. And so I wrote a story about Don Diego the night before he gets the letter from his father to come home. Wow. And him and a buddy are going to a party, and some guy insults the girl that Don Diego likes and calls her a vixen, which was not a complimentary term. Yeah. And Don Diego has a duel with him, and it's the first time he cuts somebody on the cheek with the Z for the fox. It says, if she's a vixen, you are a fox. But it's a duel of honor, so there's no crime. Yeah. And then he leaves, and the frame story takes place when he's Zorro as he's helping another young couple. And then he remembers the Rose of Madrid, and then at the end it ties it up. I won't give it away because you got to read the story.
No. I want to read it. But I haven't had a chance to read. I'm sorry to interrupt. I haven't had a chance to read any of the new book yet.
Well, that's all right. I've only read about half of it because I mean it is a brick, but it's a nice brick. But it's the because some of the stories they have like werewolves and they really go far afield, which is fine. But I really wanted to try and keep it as close to the Johnston McCulley stories. Yeah. One of the things most people don't realize is that only in, I think, 2 of the Johnston McCulley stories only in one of them that I know of, Zorro kills somebody. Mm-hmm. In The Curse of Capistrano, Zorro never kills anyone. It's Don Diego who has a duel of honor with Captain Esteban who kills him, which is why there's no crime, because it was a affair of honor. Esteban insulted the woman. And that's the other thing, is that at the end of the first book, he gives up being Zorro. Yeah. So when they came to Macaulay and said, we want more stories, he went, What do you mean? It was a one-off. And they said, we'll give you money. He says, okay. So he found a space between two of the chapters where pretty much he said, and for the next week, Zorro harried the countryside. And then the next chapter starts. Well, he said, okay, all my stories with Zorro take place in that in-between before the finale of the first novel. And although eventually I think he gave up on that and just wrote them. Because he wrote 47 stories and like 4 novels with Zorro.
I didn't realize it was that many.
Yeah, he wrote them all the way up. The last story was printed posthumously in 1953, I think, or 55. But he rewrote them all the way up into the late 40s. Although there was a 10-year gap between The Curse of Capistrano and the next 2 Zorro novels or novelettes, and then another maybe 8 years before he started writing a new series for a Western magazine. So, yeah, I mean, I really tried to capture the essence of a young, he's 18 years old. He's a Don. He's in this magical city of Madrid. He's at this huge garden party, and to evoke that, because, he's a bumpkin who's, come there 3 years before, and his eyes have been opened to this incredible world, and now he's going back to the vineyards, to make to drink wine and have fat children,
It's funny. I just have a little side story. I want to interrupt you for a second. Last September, my day job sent me to Spain. Spent everybody to Spain, and we were in Madrid. And all I could think about walking around was, and especially looking at the old buildings.
Yeah,
was Zorro. That's it. Was Diego in his college days, walking around? What would he be doing? Like that. That's what I was daydreaming about, walking around.
And that's what I did. I mean, I got a map of the city, what it looked like then, and I when I do historical stuff, I try to be reasonably accurate. So the school he went to and the street he's walking down and where the building is, all of that was correct for the period. And I mean, actually, if you watch the silent Don Q, Son of Zorro, which was the sequel that really wasn't based on a Johnston McCulley story, but it takes place in a Hollywood's version of Madrid, which isn't all that off. I mean, they did a nice job. They spent a lot of money on the silence, on sets. But yeah, to me, Zorro is the hero who, unlike Batman, is doing it because he's been scarred horribly. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do. He's a Don. He really wasn't hurt by the bad guys. He hasn't, he hasn't suffered. He's doing it because his faith and his soul tells him to use the power he has positively. And the one story where he kills somebody as Zorro, he's fighting a Don who's done some horrible chicanery, and if it comes out, he will be disgraced. So he forces Zorro to kill him in a duel. It's death by cock.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't come out. And Don Diego obliges him, but feels bad about it. And to me, that's sort of the essence of the character, as opposed to Batman. Like, I'm Batman. I'm just going to beat you to death,
Yeah.
He's not vengeance. He's justice. He's more akin to Superman than Batman in terms of his bright outlook on the world.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, there is a big positivity to his character.
And a lot of the stories are very lighthearted. They're very much like the Saint stories. Mm-hmm. There's a certain kind of anisette cookie quality to them. They don't necessarily have any meat on the bones, but they're tasty while you're reading them and pleasant. And the thing is, he copied himself. He wrote a bunch of stories for Alias the Whirlwind, which is where he ripped off his own Zorro story for 3 stories. I wrote one of them for an anthology at one point, which I thought was the closest I'd ever get to writing a Zorro story. So I was surprised. And he did one called The Return of Don something, which was made into a movie, which is basically the Zorro story again without a mask. And again, it's based on and they did one called with Ricardo Montalban and Gilbert Roland, Mark of the Renegade, which was also based on a John C. McCulley story and is very much a Zorro story. So he wrote in that period because he had done the research, and like I read all my stuff in the late 30s, once you've done the research, it's easy to kind of write into the world again. Yeah. But he's done variations on a theme. And by the way, if you can see it, Mark of the Renegade is a really good film. Ricardo Montalban is at his swashbuckling best, and Gilbert Roland is a good bad guy.
I'll check that out. I know I've never seen that one.
I had to find it on YouTube after years of looking. Yeah. It's a pretty rare film.
Yeah, you know what? I do the same thing as you. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Tubi mostly, and I watch the old stuff. I right now, because here's the thing: like when I draw, if I watch something that's new, I have to pay attention.
Yes, I will watch old stuff if it's a new or like a mystery. I have to watch it. So yes, yeah. I do comfort food while I'm working.
Yeah, exactly. And I recently have taken to Tubi to watch a lot of older movies. So I rewatched the Errol Flynn Robin Hood about a week ago. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, that was just so much.
I saw it twice on a big screen.
Yeah, you know, I could just imagine what that movie was
it is more fantasy than Star Wars could ever be. On that Technicolor, on a big screen, is breathtaking.
You know, it's funny because I'm colorblind. I see colors, but like when they start blending together, I have trouble.
Yeah.
But when you see like those old movies in Technicolor, I could even see just the brightness, the beauty of that, of what Technicolor was.
Well, the three-strip process allowed there to be a depth to the color that the two-strip process or black and white doesn't have. Yeah. You have to create it with lighting in black and white films to get any sense of depth. And the Technicolor has that. But yeah, well, I mean, technically, we're all on a spectrum of colorblind. Women see more than men, more colors, and some people can see to the ultraviolet range. So, I mean, there's really a spectrum. That's the whole thing with auras. It's really people who actually can see into an ultraviolet range, and that's what they're seeing.
I was aware of that, you know.
So, I mean, that's why certain animals see in that range all the time.
Yeah.
When your cat's looking in the corner, it's watching the monster come to get you.
Yeah. No, I know. My cat, he watches. That's one of the reasons I do this with my studio, with my door closed, so he doesn't come in and start jumping places and doing.
I was really lucky. I had a cat. She was so sweet. Had her for many years. Minnie and the Wonder Cat. She would never step on a piece of artwork. She was. I could have it laid out on the floor and she would walk around it. She was like this, you know. And I'm obsessed. I never have my water on the level of my work. I always put the cup on the floor, or here I have a separate table behind me here. Yeah. So it's nowhere near my computer or when I'm drawing. And she would walk over, stick her head in, drink my water, and then walk off. And so we drank out of the same water cup for years.
To me, that's a little, I can't do that.
I'm a Jouster cat. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I actually, I had a cat very similar. He passed away, 2016. We only had him for 8 years. His name was Jesse. Beautiful black cat, little white patch right here and on there and his stomach. But I have a tabletop drawing board. It's not near me that I can pick up. But I could go anywhere in my house, put it on my kitchen table, put it in, and he would just crawl underneath and take a nap and sleep there for literally hours. I could ink. I wasn't scared that he was going to jerk up, and I could ink. I could paint. I could do anything while he was there. And I'll be honest, I haven't really used that drawing board since he passed, but it's a little sad. But our cat now, Sesame, he's a bit he's a bit needy, and he jumps on things to get our attention.
Well, anyone who says that the animals, don't don't have personalities is like never been around animals.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah. But anyway, let's get back to Zorro. So you got to write for Zorro, and we were talking before we went on the air a little bit about Zorro, and I mentioned to you that as an artist, I tend to look at other things than what the writers look at, and for me, I even though I grew up Guy Williams, I mean, the Filmation Zorro cartoon. What was it when Disney? I think it was Disney. They did Zorro and Son. They tried to bring a TV series back. It was horrible, but it was Zorro for me.
It was still Zorro,
and I was like 8 or 9, so for me it was a cool show. And I've watched everything, the '90s, New World Zorro, like all that, but the epitome of Zorro to me will always be the Alex Toth comic.
He captured the spirit, the joie de vivre, the energy of it, and actually, when they've reprinted it in black and white without the color, I love them more even.
That's actually what I would pull it out, but I have so many things blocking it right now.
Yeah, same here. But I read some of the original color ones when they came out, obviously, when they were in the newsstands. But once the editions came out with them in black and white, it's kind of stunning how minimalistically beautiful it is. It's like the Bauhaus of drawing. Yeah. And I agree. And one thing I mentioned before, on Tubi, they now have the Tyrone Power version of Zorro colorized. And it's like a whole new movie. And actually, Disney, back in the early 90s, colorized the Guy Williams series. Yeah. And honestly, the first couple episodes I saw, I thought, wait a minute, had they shot this in color? But it turns out Disney put the extra time and money in that if there's a bunch of books in the background, all the spines are different colors and the lettering is in gold. So they took the time to make it look like it was actually shot in color. And it's one of the few times, like I said, to me, it doesn't hurt it. Although the black and white is, close to my heart. But like the Tyrone Power, it looked gorgeous in color. I'm like, damn, it really is like a whole new movie. Yeah, I'll particularly Linda Darnell in her gowns are these like gorgeous mauve and just soft colors. And it was like, wow. Somebody thought about it, as they worked on it. But yeah, there's the Alain Delon Zorro is on Tubi. Mm-hmm. There's Zorro Meets the Three Musketeers on Tubi, which is actually a pretty good film, even though it sounds dumb. It's with Lex Barker, and there's a French version of the Three Musketeers on there as well. So any sword movie I have to watch. I'm still obsessed with swords. It's not going to go away.
I don't know if I could say I'm obsessed, but that is like anytime I see a movie with swords, I look forward to the sword fights. I've always, pirate movies, anything like that. I love those type of things. Like, I'm only 48 and I feel like I should have been born much earlier with the stuff that I enjoy. And
yeah, well, I mean, I'm older and I still act like I'm 12. So, it evens out.
I mean, but that's the thing. I don't think I could do the work if I didn't keep that inner child active.
Oh, absolutely not. If you cannot play Let's Pretend on a Soul Deep version, then you are going through the motions of living.
Yeah.
If you don't love what you're doing, you might as well be Al Bundy and sell shoes. I really, what's the point? John Wayne had a saying. He says, "Life is hard. It's even harder if you're stupid." Well, life is hard, but it's even harder if you hate your life. Yeah. I mean, I've been poor most of my life, but I've enjoyed what I've done. Yeah. I realized when I talk to people, most of what I've done is the stuff that everybody says, "Gee, I wish I could." Yeah, I did it. I just didn't make a lot of money at it, but I did it.
But you
I mean,
do
I've been
what you
set
love.
on fire. I've jumped on the running board of a 1938 Cadillac firing a gun as it sped off in a movie. I've done all this stuff that you just like, gee, I wish I could do that. Well, I did it.
Yeah.
And I lived, sort of.
Yeah, no, listen, I've always said it doesn't matter what field you are going into of art.
Yeah.
You don't go into it for the cash. You do it because you really have no choice in the
Yeah.
matter. You're creating any kind of art, writing, drawing, whatever, painting, whatever it is. It's because it's inside you, and if you don't get it out of you, you're going to go nuts inside. I think.
Yeah. Well, the number of actors who were cartoonists
Mhm.
or writers or both is more than you can imagine. Michael Caine and Roger Moore, and because telling stories, John Lithgow, telling stories is the thing. It's just the medium you choose to do it. It's like I paint. I can paint in watercolor, I can paint in oils, or I can paint in gouache, but I'm still painting. Well, I can tell a story in words, or I can tell a story in pictures, or I can tell a story with my body, as an actor. So it's all connected, and I think one feeds the other, which is why I say when you're writing, the fact that you're an artist will make your writing stronger because you will see it. When I first started, I used to do full renderings of the rooms for my characters. And I still do portraits of my characters. I know exactly what they look like. Even though they're not going to be anywhere, I know what they look like, which is why when I get a bad book cover, I go nuts. It's like, they don't look like that. But because I know exactly what they look like. I know what their clothes are. I know what the room looks like because I can visualize it. And that will be a strength for you writing prose. So
that's actually one thing that I was told I'm too descriptive because I think I see.
You know what? You can edit later.
Yeah.
Be over descriptive and then edit it as you go where it like, oh, I need this passage to move fast. I don't need to describe the whole couch.
Yeah.
But that comes with experience.
Yeah.
But if you don't see it, you can't write it.
Yeah. No, I get that.
Because there's a syndrome called the white room syndrome where the characters just talk to each other and there's no backgrounds and no place. And that's the worst kind of writing. Might as well just be a script. But even in a script, you got to tell them what the room looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Exactly.
In fact, I've taken screenplays of mine and turned them into novels.
Really?
Because it's a good way to basically do a long outline.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you build into it. Then you get into the character's internal. So your comic book background will absolutely serve you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate that. And by the way, when I'm looking down, I'm not ignoring you. I'm using my Cintiq as another monitor so I could see it better than putting it because I have where I'm looking at you is on my laptop. I got another screen here, but I have this, and I wanted to ask
you kids and your screens.
Got the phone here and the laptop.
I got the phone. I got the laptop. My TV's over there. Yeah,
my iPad's behind me. It's the whole thing.
I got a monk in the corner scrolling out illuminated books.
Actually, even though I do draw on my iPad, I seem to use it more as a television set these days. It's just a portable TV now. But I wanted to ask you, because I mentioned earlier that we have a mutual friend, Tom Siaka, and he says, and this is his comment on what I posted on Facebook, yes, he published me and George Perez first art, so it was the first time Perez was published.
Yeah.
Was in your fanzine Factors Unknown. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what that fanzine was?
I was a comic book nut. I was doing, comic book stories. All my notebooks in grammar school were, there very few of them had words. They were mostly guys, stick figures, sword fighting around the edges of the page. Eventually, I did my own comic books, and me and Sal Quartuccio and Pat O'Neill, who we all met through the Suling conventions, wanted to do a comic, a book. The first fanzine we did was Xerox.
Mm.
And then when I met more people like George and Tom, we'd upgrade a little bit, and we did fold stapled offset printed fanzine. We had a Gil Kane sketch that I inked for a cover, and we had a Neil Adams back cover from a sketch that he did at a convention, and Tom had stories in there. I had stories. Pat O'Neill had stories in there. George had, I think it was the Death Squad was his first series in it, and they were basically the Monster Squad as cops.
Okay.
And we did a couple of issues of Factors Unknown, and I mean George from the get-go was awesome. I mean, it's heresy, but I actually like his earlier work in many ways more than his later work, because he actually got so much into noodling. There's so much detail in some of his later stuff. It overpowers the fact that underneath it's just a really good drawing.
Yeah.
And his original stuff was simpler, but he was always good. And then he got into Marvel, and there was just no stopping him, you know. And then DC, and you know, and then he became the legend that he became. It helped that he was also the nicest freaking guy on the planet. He would give you the shirt off his back. He was kind to every fan because he was still a fan himself. He geeked out all the time working with pros. He was like, I can't believe I'm drawing this character. And I know that in the beginning, like Paul Levitz was in that same circle of friends with me, and he eventually went on to be the president of DC and publisher. But George was the guy when they'd say, damn, we have a book with 75 characters in it. George would go, I'll do it. And they'd be like, here, go. You know, he never, and he just, like Jack Kirby, he was a machine. He was a machine. And he just never stopped. But yeah, I mean, that's going back a long time. I remember just before water when I was drinking dirt. I said, Mel Brooks, you're really old. Yeah, I mean, so, you know, but we published, Tom did a fanzine, and I'm trying to remember the hell the name of it was. He did a couple of issues of that, small, like 8.5 by 11 folded. And I did some artwork in that. And we did a bunch of like stupid movies together, you know, Super 8 movies and stuff. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, we were just, I was still in high school when I met him. And, you know, by college, we drew apart because of just my work schedule. And by then they had moved on, and, you know, they were ensconced. Tom worked in, he worked at Adam's studio for a while, and he was in DC for a long time, and Marvel. I went the other direction because, like I said, when I got out of college, I ended up going into film work. Yeah. So I was on movie sets and soap opera sets, getting set on fire and, you know, knocked down stairs and shit. So, you know, I'm not sure who had the better of it, but I was Doctor Strange for Marvel for 7 years. If you look at 87, 88, 89, maybe it's 86, 87, 88. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day float, I'm the Doctor Strange on it.
Really?
But I also, for that 7 years in between, because they built the costume to fit me, and I had this giant cervical collar with a giant yellow, you know, cape, and I looked like, really more like Bruner's Doctor Strange than Ditko's, but I, you know, so I had dark hair, I added the gray, and I did personal appearances around the country at supermarkets and malls. They would fly us all over the place. Wow. Me and Captain America and the Hulk, Doctor Doom, And I did the Macy's parade for 3 years on the float, and that was wild because at the personal appearances, I was the only character who had a face. Everybody else was masked.
Yeah.
And so the kids could relate to me a little bit more, even though I was giant and scary. I had a face they could look at, and I could smile at them and stuff, you know. And on the parade, instead of this, I did this, which is "I love you" in sign, you know. And that was my little, throw it in there for me. But so so I was in Marvel, but not the same way he was in Marvel.
Yeah.
You know? So it was some fun times back then. New York soap operas were really good work. I worked on every one of them except Texas that shot in New York.
Okay.
I was in the last week of Edge of Night, doubling somebody jumping off a hayloft on somebody else on a barn. So that was, I did close to like 400 soap opera appearances over the course of like 8-9 years. Paid my rent pretty much from it.
That's great.
It was awesome. It was awesome. I got to play make believe. And I had business up front, fun in the back. I had a mullet that I could fold up underneath with pins, so I could play cops on the soap, and on the weekends I could go to the Ren Fair with the longer hair. So I had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
A lot of guys would go out in the summer and do tours, but I never took tours because I was getting soap opera work. I did not want to lose my weekdays. I could work the Ren Fair on the weekend and still work soap operas during the week and make my rent.
Yeah.
So strange but true.
It's funny. You keep saying, you get to play make believe, and every time you said that, it throws me back to my childhood, and when I learned that TV was all make believe, and it was it was because of an episode of Mr. Rogers. It was a 2-parter where they visit the set of The Incredible Hulk, and I was so scared of The Incredible Hulk as a little kid. Like, I loved watching the show because I knew the comic character, I knew the cartoon, I knew he was a superhero, but it wasn't the Hulk that I knew. Yeah, and like you'd see him come in and like with the right to the camera, and and that's how they cut to commercial. And I remember being a kid and like holding on to my couch really tightly, knowing that if he comes to the TV, he can't take me because I'm holding on to my couch.
Yep.
But I remember this episode, like I said, it was a 2-parter of Mr. Rogers where he visits the set, and they actually show the makeup being put on Lou, and they show a scene where he has to, jump out of an airplane and how it's done and all the mats being laid around. And that's when I learned that all this was make believe, and I could grow up to be part of it. And I didn't want to do what you did, but I wanted to get more into more like the directing and writing stories and whatnot. And I did some training, but I never really took that path.
Never too late.
I know. I still have stuff that I think maybe one day.
Particularly now with the technology we got.
Yeah.
Anybody can be a Spielberg.
No, I know. I used to actually teach. I taught for 20 years, and one of the things I taught besides visual storytelling, which was my all-time favorite class to teach, was the entire Adobe suite outside of Dreamweaver, because I hate web design.
Well, I got to meet Lou Ferrigno in person.
Yeah.
And he's the nicest human being on the planet.
I've met him a couple of times.
And I'm 6'6", and he's 6'5", but he's 2 of me, and he's
Yeah.
I'm not going to walk up and go, "Hey, shorty." No, that would not be a good thing. But just an incredible, gentle giant.
I've had the experiences back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I first started doing shows. I started doing them in 97. I went to the Big Apple Comic Cons, like the Mike Carbo shows, when they were in the basement of the church up by Columbus Circle.
I remember those. I went to
And
a couple of those.
and Lou was at almost every single one. So I got to, like, every time I'd be like, I would just say hi, chat with him. I don't think he would remember who I am today, but I think,
Well, yeah, they see so many people.
Yeah.
I met Jeffrey Holder that way,
Mhm.
and it was one of the coolest experiences forever.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I've been very blessed to play in a number of yards that if I hadn't been paid, I would have done.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the amount of money, it might as well not have been paid. However, I look back on it and I'm blessed, that I made it this far, that most of my parts work, that I never turned in a bad performance. It may have been a crappy movie, many of them were, but I give you the same work for $5 as for $500 as for $5,000. I always, I learned early on, you always do your best work because you just never know what's going to be the one.
Yeah.
The one where you're lazy is the one that is preserved forever.
Yeah.
And I think I love it. I still love the unreality. I love being on soap opera sets. I love like the fake building. I love the concept of it.
Yeah.
I just think it's storytelling, and I can have a critical part of me, but the other part of me is a 9-year-old going, ooh,
Yeah.
and I don't ever want to lose that.
I hope you don't.
I'm not going to have a second childhood. I haven't left the first one.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
You can't see it behind me because it's a mess, but I've got, a sailing ship, a dirigible, a Captain America figure, a bunch of stuff on the shelf behind me because, when I get bored, I'll play with them.
Yeah.
Because why not? I think too many people are afraid to be childlike because they think it's childish.
Yeah.
And I think if you approach the world with a childlike wonder and heart, you don't age and you're not miserable.
Yeah, I've had talks with adults when I've taught, because I've taught all ages, and sometimes I've taught adults about trying to be creative and trying to remember when you were a little kid.
Yeah, unlearn all the stuff you told yourself you can't do.
Exactly, and I remember talking, and one of the things I would do when I would give these kind of lectures, it's something I actually still do. I get on the floor, I lay on my stomach, and I draw, because that's how I drew as a kid. And even though I can sit at my Cintiq, my drawing table, my easel, whatever I'm working on, and do what I need to do, and toss out a professional piece of work, when I'm sketching, when I'm just doodling and playing with ideas, I'm on the floor, or I'm laying on my couch or my bed on my stomach, drawing in my drawing pad. Because
I always preferred a lapboard to an art desk. I would sit on the couch with a lapboard because that's how I grew up, with a pad on my lap. And even when I'm writing, I don't think I could ever write in a room where I couldn't lay down on a bed, because I will lay down and I will run the scenario in my head 3 or 4 times in different ways, and I'll get up and write it because I can see it, I can live it, I can dream it. And all what we're doing, this is making dreams real. And to me, we live in a world where we need to have dreams, we need to have hope. And even when I'm writing dark stuff, I have to have hope in it, because otherwise, just hand out razor blades. I don't want that. I write horror, but I kind of call it horror light, or hopeful horror. It's Buffy horror.
Okay.
It's it's not a chainsaw horror.
Yeah.
Although I have done some dark stories when an anthology asked for it, but I don't enjoy that as much as when I'm writing an adventure story.
Yeah.
And often I write the story because I want to find out what's going to happen, because I don't know when I start.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh man, wow. You know what? I think we're going to end it because I think we can go off on so many tangents
We
right now
probably could.
and just talk about so many things. But I really just, tonight was really about promoting and talking about the Zorro books, which I know we did here.
Zorro, Zorro, Zorro.
And you know what? For those who have never like worked on a licensed character like Zorro, just to let you guys know, as the artist, I am given, rules. It has to look like Guy Williams Zorro or, the New
Yeah.
World Zorro. You can't use Antonio Banderas Zorro and, whatever. I don't know. So it's just, I basically, for my reference, look up pictures or movies. But the Zorro I did in here, the story, just this is what I like about the story. Susan Kite wrote the story. I forgot the exact name of it. Let me see if I can find it. Zorro finds his true calling. It's actually based on a three-part episode of season 2 of the Guy Williams Zorro,
Yep.
where the trapper, the American trapper,
I remember that.
and so I just watched these 3 episodes of Zorro, like I couldn't even tell you how many times, just to kind of get a feel for the
Oh, yeah,
character.
I mean, I watched a bunch of Zorro episodes,
Yeah.
but I reread the original Zorro stories
Yeah,
because that's the thing. When you're doing a licensed character, for people who don't know, you can't kill Lois Lane.
Yeah.
If you're writing a Superman story, unless you bring her back, you can't have Superman strangle a dog. Yeah, there are certain like strictures that the character has, and as a creator, I totally respect that because that's why I went back to the original McCulley stories. I wanted to write a story that if Johnston McCulley read it, he would go, "Did I write that? I could have." And I wanted it to have that sense, that feel that this is continuing the original. I'm not giving it a completely new spin. I'm giving it a new aspect, a little bit more, because otherwise I'll write my own character. If I want to go completely radical, I'll create my own character, the Chicken Hawk or something, and that's why I have El Rojo, the evil pirate, and the Red Devil, because I want to honor it. And I said, with licensed characters, you're not serving yourself. You're not even serving the reading public. Your first serving is the guy signing the checks. It's the guy who owns the character who says, "No, you can't do that." Zorro doesn't have a tattoo. And so I'm always very conscious of that when I'm writing a licensed character, because I want to make it seem like, oh, this is an undiscovered story. And if I can do that and bring my joy to it, then the audience is going to love it too, I hope.
Yeah, no, but I agree. When you're working on something that you love and it comes through, I think.
Yeah.
It comes through to the reader as well.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, before I let you go, where can people find you on social media?
The police have an all points bullet now for me. But you can find me at theurbanswashbuckler.com, which is at this point an ancient website that really needs bad updating. But I'm on Facebook, Teel James Glenn, and TEEL, not like the color. And I'm all over the place. If you Google me, unfortunately, I couldn't hold up a bodega because people would find my face. No matter how many stockings I put over my head, they were like, "Oh yeah, that was TJ." Yeah, that's it. But I'm around and I'm on Amazon. Please punch that button. Go to Amazon. Buy every book of mine. Make sure that my daughter can have a really great time when her dad's completely retired.
Yeah, no, I was on your Amazon. You have, I think, what was it, 8 pages of books?
Yeah, something like that.
I'm going to look you up real quick and just drop that link in so people can find you on here.
And coming out in September, like I said, end of September, the beginning of October is Paradise Investigations, Not Born of Woman.
That's
and-
the Frankenstein's monsters.
Yep. And as soon as I hear from Bold Venture when we have an actual date on the Pulp God book,
Yeah.
I'll poke you, because I have a feeling that'll be really of interest to your viewers too.
I would love that. I would love that. Yeah, so you guys, don't forget, you can pick up these books on Amazon. The Zorro Sword Playing Romance is the most recent one that both Teel and I got to work on, as well as Zorro's Exploits.
They're all really good
Yeah,
stories.
They,
and
they are. I've read a lot.
They
of
really go the gamut from horror stories to silly stories, wonderfully silly stories, and everything in between. It's a really nicely curated collection, both of them.
And just one quick reminder about, where is it? Right there at the Wiz Comic. You can get a copy of all last year's strips, plus a few bonus pages. The Whimsical Wiz, all the complete 2023 collection on Amazon right now.
Remember, if you have to take a whiz, this is the one you have to take.
Thank you. I like that plug. Actually, on my I have business cards that when I meet people, I hand them here. Take a whiz.
There you go. Hey, if you can't go for the low joke, there's no point going for a joke.
Exactly. All right. Well, you know what? Thank you for coming on. I'm going to drop you backstage real quick and just do my wrap up.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. All right, guys. So that was really, really fun talking. I'm sure Teel and I could have talked for a lot longer. I mean, really interesting guy, but I think, just me and him have a lot in common with the type of stuff we enjoy reading, watching, the whole thing. So Teel will be back in the future on the show as long as he says yes. So yeah, next week I'm coming back with some I think next week is going to be a really interesting show, in the sense where oh wait, no, that's the one I'm thinking is August 7th. I had planned for that one. That one you really want to check out. Next week I'll be coming back with another fun guest. I have everything all planned out for that already. Some really cool stuff coming up that I'm looking forward to announcing personally for my art. Yeah, and I put Teel's Amazon link in the chat, so wherever you're watching from, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, you can find it in the chat. Please check out his stuff. Please follow him. Look him up on Facebook, Instagram, the whole place, and I'll see you next week. All right. Bye, guys.